So we're really happy to be in the room with Robert Rodriguez, the former Secretary of State of New York, and now he's the president of the Dormitory Authority of the state of New York. Welcome. I wanted to give people a little insight into who you are as a person. I know you were a former assemblyman. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about what inspired you to get into public service?
Sure. I would say the inspiration comes from a lot of places, but it always goes back to your parents and your grandparents. My grandparents came over from Puerto Rico with not a lot of money, and they came over with the vision of how to, create an opportunity for their family. And, they came from Ponce and from Vieques, and one was a bodega owner and one was a barber, right? So it's that immigrant story coming to it. And even though we're citizens as Puerto Ricans, you start from the bottom and you got to figure out how to work your way up. And they did that. And they were able to do better for the next generation. My dad was involved in politics. He was a council member, one of the youngest ones at that time. And in that time in the late 70s, early 80s, is about how to create opportunity for representation and change in a neighborhood that needed a lot of it. And he grew up in public housing. And so my connection to the East Harlem community and the Latino and Puerto Rican experience is really rooted in that.
Is there a quality about yourself that you think drives this dedication to public service? What is that quality inside of you? Because not everyone has that desire.
That's interesting. I think it's the desire to leave things better than you got them, and to make sure that those folks who are, historically underrepresented have a chance, right? A chance at that opportunity, a chance to be able to get that job, a chance to be able to do something different that changes the arc of their life and maybe the generational arc that's there. So I think for me, that's been a little bit of the motivation, and then also seeing what's possible. My 10-year tenure, in the assembly, we didn't win all the battles we fought, but if you get a few wins along the way that you really know can make a difference in people's lives, like getting money for public housing from New York State, that was a big deal. That it hadn't been done for decades. And the fact that we're doing that and continuing to do that now is one of those victories that you can count on, but also realizing that investment means something. It means something to the people in public housing. It means something to the state that's investing in them, and was a precursor for a lot of the work around the public trust, the NYCHA trust conversation. So, all those things are ways that policy can really change and impact communities in positive ways.
What gets you excited about DASNY?
So DASNY is one of those institutions that if you are in municipal finance, you know about it. If you're in construction, you know about it. If you're in government, you know about it. If you're outside of those areas, you may have never heard about it. You may have never heard of us. And so our history goes back 80 years. We were created specifically to create student housing for folks who were coming back from World War II as part of the GI Bill. And that was how we started 80 years ago, hence the name, the Dormitory Authority of the state of New York. But we don't use that name as much because we are so much beyond dorms. Today, we are the premier municipal issuer for the state of New York. We raise anywhere between $8 to $10 billion a year for New York State, as well as for our partner clients who are healthcare and higher ed issuers. Clients so names that you'll know, the NYU Langones, the Columbias, the Montefiores, the Northwells, pretty much the ecosystem of healthcare and higher ed. And they're able to do that because you can sell tax-exempt bonds, and that's a good deal for investors, and it's a good deal for the state as well as for the issuer.
You're mentioning these billions of dollars. Before you move on to what you're going to talk about continuing, I just want to clarify, right? There's billions of dollars for people who don't understand finance. Can you explain how DASNY helps save money for the state and local taxpayers?
Yes. So, goes to tax-exempt bonds. It's really, it sounds simple. It's basically a loan that we are able to take on behalf of investors who will lend us the money in return for an interest rate, and the proceeds of those are tax exempt for the investor. So that's why they're willing to lend us money. Well, that's the benefit that they receive, which allows us to borrow that money in exchange for interest and do the building and the capital construction items that we have. And many of our partners, as long as it's going for a purpose that meets tax exemption, will choose to borrow through us as a conduit issuer, because then they get the benefit of that tax exemption, and our participation in it as a conduit allows them to get a better interest rate than if they were issuing it on their own on the taxable basis.
Now, is DASNY at all involved in affordable housing?
Well, before we get to the housing question, I want to make sure I round out what DASNY does, because we talked a little bit about the bond component, which is a very important part of our portfolio. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our construction portfolio. And we serve as the builder and for much of SUNY and CUNY's, certainly dorm facilities, but also other academic buildings, and also the builder of choice for many of the state agencies, including mental health and the Health Department of Health, as well as some of the other agencies, OASIS and OCFS. So we have a number of different clients that we have that are state agencies that also do that. And then our third kind of business line is grants. So all the grants that are administered by our legislative partners or the executive branch are managed through DASNY. So our construction portfolio is probably around $12 billion, so it's a significant amount. And our grants portfolio can be anywhere between $2 to $4 billion.
Give an example of that. So like to humanize that, right? Let's say you're a nonprofit, you go to your local state senator, your local state assembly member, and you say, like, is there an example you could give for funding that went out?
One of our NYSIP grantees was in Saratoga Springs, and it's going towards an equine therapy. So for many people who do not follow it, it's a mental health program where folks work with horses to be able to better address their mental health goals. A lot of folks with trauma are able to better relate to their feelings and situation through work with animals. And that's why, we already know how pets are an important part of that. But this program in particular was able to build the capacity for them, build a large additional facility so they can run classes and therapy sessions with veterans, with local community members year round. And it's also an opportunity for retired horses to come to them and be part of their program.
When it comes to it, like when I think of the hot topics in New York, I think about cannabis, public safety, and housing. So is DASNY involved in building affordable housing?
So thankfully, we have an agency that's really focused on day-to-day housing issues. That's our Housing and Community Renewal Office, HCR. They do housing day in, day out. But we are seeing more and more creative ideas around developing housing, and particularly that potential partnership that can exist between student housing, state university, city university properties, and trying to figure out how to unlock both the needs of the community, the student community, as well as the surrounding community. So we're currently looking at and exploring P3 opportunities, public-private partnerships that try to meet a number of needs. We have some institutions that have growing enrollment and also have workforce housing needs. Some of our examples are some of the large institutions with healthcare institutions that are part of their portfolio. So some of the big guys like Stony Brook University that also has a partnership, and large medical institutions realize that they have workforces that need housing, so are looking at exploring ways to create both more student housing and more workforce housing.
Okay, this is all good to know. And the tie to education and thinking about higher education, is there a way DASNY works with other types of education and educational facilities that are not higher education around the state?
So we are focused 100% on higher education. And I think that's really important because just the SUNY and the CUNY portfolios alone are enormous. So our mission right there is, I think SUNY Central, if we looked at their needs, they have almost $9 billion worth of capital needs that they have undertaken, right? So we were working with them in terms of their capital plan to get that done and off the ground, and CUNY has a similarly ambitious portfolio. So we're happy to work with them on focusing on their needs. But we do also intersect with other higher ed institutions. Through our financing, they're able to issue debt at favorable terms and costs. And so we work with many institutions to be able to help raise the dollars that they put into place for their own capital and construction needs. So, we touch higher education in so many different ways, but I think really what we're seeing in that space is how do you build facilities that will really attract and retain talent in certain areas.
Last question, when we talk about these public-private partnerships, this came to mind. It's DASNY is government, your communication with the private sector, you're talking about the finance aspect of what you do. What's a way, like how do you work with the public? Like you're talking about enhancing communities over by Lehman College, Medgar Evers College, getting more nurses, you're having higher enrollment rates. Like what's a way that the public can weigh in on some of these construction projects that you're working towards?
Yeah, most of the time, anytime that there's a project that we're doing, it has a significant environmental review process, and that requires community input. So that's one of the ways that legally, as part of the law, we are opening up that conversation about how this project can and may and should impact the community. And it gives me a chance to talk about one last project, Skye, if you allow me.
Yes.
We have this huge project in Albany, which is our $1.7 billion Wadsworth Health Lab facility. And this facility is really bringing together a group of different labs that does really important work on public health issues, different kinds of diseases, different kinds of, it's kind of like the CDC for New York State, and just really making sure that we do important research on how to prevent them, how to deal with them in terms of any public health crises, both whether they're viruses or plant-based or animal-based or any kind of different issues. We have to continue to keep up to see, is there an opportunity to exceed 35%? Certainly if the demographics are exceeding 35%, can we help to do that and foster that community across the state? Now, this is very important because it is a statewide initiative. DASNY is not the only agency that is doing that. And really what that does is help to create enough opportunity and work for the MWBE companies to be able to grow and develop. That's why the work at Port Authority is so important. That's why the work that's happening with MTA is so important. That's why the work that's happening at Empire State Development is so important. All of those, continue to create a baseline for MWBEs to participate. And I think much of the work that we're going to be doing over the next few years is figuring out how we continue to foster that community, support it. And we're a small piece of the bigger pie of state government work and also private sector work. There are significant facilities that are going to have to be built in the central New York, Syracuse region, in addition to the transportation projects that are happening there. So there's a lot of work out there.
Really, it's an all-encompassing role.
Thank you, Skye. Thank you for the opportunity to share that and give people a little bit of an idea of what DASNY does and how we can be helpful in serving not just the state of New York, but helping all communities in different ways.